All right. Hello and welcome, everybody. My name is Amanda Smithers, and I'm a postdoctoral fellow at Harvard Medical School. And I'm also a member of our Early Career Researcher Committee for US HUPO. I'm so excited to have some really fantastic participants in today's webinar, which is a continuation of our career transitions series. Today, we're looking at some non-traditional careers. And I think this is just going to be a super thought-provoking, and once again, couldn't be more excited about our two panelists today. The way today's webinar will work is we're going to have each of our two panelists present for about 20 minutes, followed by a 20-minute combined question and answer session. However, if at any point you have a question, please go ahead and put it in the Q&A portal, and we will get to the questions during the Q&A session at the end. So to start us off is going to be Dr. Asher Newsome. So Dr. Asher Newsome received a BS in chemistry from the University of Georgia before getting his PhD in analytical chemistry at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, my alma mater as well, where he worked with Gary Glish to develop sophisticated tandem mass spectrometry and sampling methods to analyze peptides and small molecule aerosols. Following his PhD, Asher was a postdoctoral researcher for the FDA Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition, where he developed LC-MS assays for allergenic food proteins and complex matrices. Asher later worked for Nova Research Inc. as a contractor for the U.S. Naval Research Laboratory and ERP International LLC as a contractor for the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center before taking his current role at the Smithsonian Museum Conservation Institute. Asher's current interests involve modifying ambient sampling and ionization techniques for cultural heritage and conservation science applications. And for this work, Asher received the 2019 Smithsonian Scholarly Studies Award. So with that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Asher Newsome.
Oh, I guess my video stays off. Sorry. Okay, let's share that screen, everybody. Hi. Well, thanks for coming. Start my video. Okay. All right. Now we're in business. Welcome, everybody. So that was the super brief recap. Now I'm just going to do a slightly longer recap. That's just going to be career focused, and already there's a misnomer in the title because I'm going to go back even farther than my postdoc at the FDA, and I'm going to try to make an effort to kind of point out where the things that I did along the way got incorporated into some of the stuff that I do today. So just, yes, when I was born. Now, I'm from Georgia originally, went to University of Georgia, was my undergrad in chemistry, figured out I wanted to do instrumentation work and then mass spectrometry. And then I went to UNC Chapel Hill, joined the Glish lab, and was working in ion traps and fairly hardcore instrumentation, not necessarily building stuff from scratch, like building instruments from scratch, but definitely doing some modifications and doing some different things. So my two big halves of my life there were photo dissociation in an ion trap and also this aerosol work in an ion trap. Pointer. So yeah, these are the two things, and this is really what got me hooked in mass spectrometry. I mean, I joined the lab, but it was this project that really that set me for life. So this was all about ions that are trapped in a quadrupole ion trap and manipulating them in such a way that they can be irradiated by an infrared laser and more efficiently captured as they dissociate. So instead of shooting a laser down the center of the ion trap where the ion cloud is, instead the idea was we move this laser off to the side and we resonantly excite your precursor molecule into the laser. And then when it dissociates, the product ions fall back out because they're not resonantly excited anymore, and they get trapped very efficiently in the center, which was a new way of doing IRMPD, and was a great thing for me. That I mean, this was my project that I sort of invented, and you always have a lot of love for your first project. This involved some electronics work, nothing super heavy, but electronics work and programming the RF ramps for the program of the ion trap, and really getting the the class and the fundamentals of ion trapping. The other half of my life was constructing an aerosol instrument out of a different ion trap with a kind of unconventional system that we came up with. So taking our ring electrodes and drilling a hole in one side of the ring electrode, and then designing this vacuum system that would allow an aerosol to be ported in from the atmospheric pressure and focus through this aerodynamic lens and actually shoot aerosol particles into the ion trapping volume, which was itself heated by this bake-out bulb. So it's quite warm in there, and the electrodes themselves were quite warm. And when the aerosols impacted the opposite side of the ring electrode, that is where they would vaporize, and it was within the ion trap, they would also react with reagent ions that we had separately poured it in. So all the chemistry would happen right in the middle for this real-time detection. And so as the end of my time, I felt like I had done a decent job of balancing between applications-focused work and instrumentation-focused work. But I wanted to learn new things in the postdoc. And what I ended up going with was moving up here to Maryland, where I am now, and going to the FDA Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition in College Park, right close to the University of Maryland, and learned something about LC, because I'd never done separations of any kind. We used to infuse peptide signal, in a pulled capillary, but doing LCMS on modern instrumentation, which we very much did not have in school. The project was all about developing an assay for detecting milk in baked goods. As part of the group we were in, other people were also focusing on allergenic proteins. So this project definitely was a real learning experience in the world of sample handling, especially food sample handling, which can be particularly nasty because there's a lot of things in food. We used to joke that like blood is always blood, but every food is different. So extracting things out of complex matrices was very important. Learning other fundamentals about complex matrices and how to deal with them, how to clean things up, how to extract them out. And so this was tracking casein, the most abundant protein in dairy milk, tracking its extraction efficiency and how that extraction efficiency changes with baking time. Perhaps unsurprisingly, it drops right off as your proteins of interest become bound up and caramelized by the Maillard reaction and so forth. And so then towards the end of my time at the FDA, I was looking for the next step. And what that next step ultimately ended up being, long story short, is to go to the Naval Research Laboratories and be a contractor, and had another set of very different projects. So another little sea change. And this is where I got into ambient ionization and GCMS. So the ambient ionization project, I hope the screen isn't cut off for everybody like it is for me. But the ambient ionization was on an Orbitrap system, and it started off being used to study fundamentals about explosive molecules for, this is for defensive purposes. So very quickly on, early on in my studies with this, I would do an analysis of this one particularly nasty peroxide-based explosive called HMTD. And then a month later, I did the analysis again in the exact same way, and all of a sudden the signal looked different. Well, what happened? What happened was the building is old and has not the best air handling in the world. And so this is the difference between December and March in terms of humidity and temperature in the lab. And expanded this work to other small molecules as well, and found that, yeah, humidity did make significant differences depending on exactly what you were doing with DART or with other ambient ionization sources. On the other hand, one of the other projects that I did, also with explosives, with what would have been fairly conventional GCMS detection of explosives, we actually got into some more interesting chemistry that I won't go into detail with, but started getting weird with the GCMS a little bit. and started introducing dopants and doing chemical ionization, which is not done in GCMS a lot. And what came out of that was learning how to really foul up your CI source and bust up your filaments in a GCMS. So I was interested in looking at isobutane because I knew from the literature, the 50-year-old literature at that time, that isobutane was really good at producing an intact molecule, or an intact not molecule, but molecular ion. Thank you. So, sorry, obviously I've been working in neat electrons too long. But the problem with isobutane was that it would totally foul up your source. And this was something that was not terribly well reported in any recent literature, because it's not something that is done a lot outside of industry anymore. But this is what it looks like to your filament after just a few runs. It warps the filament just back and forth. And the short version of what came afterward was we found that you could dilute the amount of isobutane in a makeup gas and do a whole bunch of runs and have those runs look really good and have the filament look really good even after a lot of time. So these projects got me into more types of equipment, gas chromatography and the practical operations with that. Things like mass flow controllers for moving air around your ambient ion sources, and just other types of projects. Then fast forward to the Smithsonian, where now a bit of brief background on where I am at the Smithsonian, at the Museum Support Center. These are buildings that contain about half of everything the Smithsonian owns. They're called pods. They're each about the size of a football field. And they've got rows and rows of cabinets and shelves and all kinds of stuff. And then the perimeter along here are the labs where we do many different types of research, including my lab. So I want to sort of give you a brief idea of some of the things that we consider when working here at the Smithsonian. In the analysis, the number one question is, do we have owner permission and informed consent to really do this analysis? That could mean multiple things. We have to talk to who is the owner of the object. That could be an individual, it could be the Smithsonian, it could be some other organization from outside the federal government even. Other interested parties can have a say in this, particularly if we're dealing with cultural heritage items. If the groups from whence those items came are extant, then it is important to all of us who are interested in the ethical handling of this work to bring those people in and have them involved and get an idea of what it is we want to do and what we can know and how we can handle it in many different considerations. So analytically, those considerations, because this is mass spectrometry that I'm doing, is can I cut a piece off? It is destructive analysis after all, and that material has to come from somewhere. So how much material can be cut off? What if a bit just fell off? That is a real consideration. There's a technical term for that. It's called self-sampling. A bit just fell off of its own accord. Can we move the object in the lab? Perhaps it is too large to fit through the door or too fragile to be handled. So that's important to know. Can the sample be wetted with solvent? That's just another way that you might consider something damaged if it leaves a mark of some kind, like a tie line, which is what happens if you've ever had an old book that goes out in the rain. It forms those wavy brown lines as the water dries, because all the dirt washed to that tie line. How much solvent can we use if we're going to do that sort of thing? Is there going to be a mark of some kind? How big's that mark going to be? And the answer to all these questions really is what your conservator, curator, interested parties say is okay. That's how much of destructive or visible sampling you can do. And then for concerns on my part, is there anything toxic on this object that I should know about before I handle it with gloves or otherwise, or breathe near it? Things have been subjected to pesticides in the past and preservatives like arsenic and mercury, and there's a lot of stuff out there that you would like to know before we use contemporary safety protocols. And then for the collaborators, is there anything in particular that we're looking for here that would certainly make it a lot easier on me if we can target the analysis. So I just want to give you just a few examples from my lab on this. Start with self-sampled objects. So I want to make it clear here that the vast majority of the projects we do here, normal types of sampling are completely fine. There are plenty of situations where you can cut off a small piece. There are other situations where there are considerations. So take this lump of this, believe it or not, it's textile. It's excavated from the tomb of the historical King Midas. It was textile. This is what happens when you let really old textile get laminated all together through neglect and exposure to the elements. This is something that you can't help but have self-sampled objects because it is really falling apart. So this is me very carefully taking tweezers and holding a small bit of this material in between a direct analysis in real time or DART probe and its inlet to the transfer tube to the mass spectrometer, just putting that material in between here so that the excited state species that are in the heated gas flow can desorb material off of this bit of crumb that's put in here and produce some ions of interest. And that's exactly what we have in the mass spectrum on the right here. And we see right away some telltale natural dyes, alizarin and purpurin. Those are natural red dyes, although they can be made with other colors depending on how you mix it. They're found in a root. It's called rose madder and other things. And there's other notable background ions and other things as well. But I just want to finish up before I take too much time by talking with what my real area of interest is. What about large objects? I mean, really large objects, not something that you can sample, not something certainly that you can fit in that small gap between your DART and your transfer tube. I mean, a really large object. What if you've got a basket that is half your size? This is a picture from the National Museum of the American Indian and their storage facility. Rows of shelves. This polyvinyl chloride art object from Smithsonian's American Art Museum. I like this one. And then over here from Utvar Hazy, which is the other Air and Space Museum out by Dulles Airport, not downtown, with Flak Bait, this World War I plane, the only World War I D-Day plane that still has the original D-Day stripes still painted on it. How do you handle these really large objects? Well, I'm not about to talk about miniaturization. That is definitely an interest for me. And while there are miniature ion traps out there now, we are not yet to the point of miniaturized, high-resolution, high-performance mass spectrometry. But there are other things that we can do. And so I'll talk about just two case studies that have recently been published. One of these is liquid microjunction probe sampling. So in this case, we had this illuminated manuscript that's about 400 years old, had done some X-ray fluorescence analysis on all these illuminations to identify what that pigmentation is. But there was nothing to say for the red, except that it's organic. So we're enlisted to find what the organic red is. So in this case, I, along with an intern, now postdoc, rejiggered an autosampler robot and turned it into a liquid microjunction probe. So it delivers this sub-millimeter needle down very close to the surface and makes this very tiny liquid bridge with the dye surface. And in that liquid bridge, we're going to extract organic molecules. And here are some close-up before and after shots from one of those illuminations. The before is before, the after. You can see this is a very tiny wet spot, less than 1 millimeter wide. This is kind of a worst case scenario, but it's, you know, a pretty good worst case scenario to have. And our curator was fine with this. The information we got out of this, once we harvested this small amount of liquid and then infused it onto the Orbitrap, we get a nice clear signal for carminic acid, or cochineal, which is the red dye you get from crushing up bugs. It's something that has been known for hundreds of years. And it was one of the distinct possibilities that we thought we might be able to see based on the time of, or how old that object was. And more recently, another system that I've built for the real, even further efforts towards non-contact or non-invasive sampling is this probe I built for neutral thermal desorption. So instead of generating ions at this site far away from a mass spectrometer, generating just neutral materials. So this is example of the probe working to put out this little puff of heated nitrogen neutral off of thermal paper. That's actually just your grocery store receipt paper that develops into a dark dye when it's exposed to heat. And then those neutral desorbed materials are pulled into a transfer tube. Now that transfer tube is moving our materials for a few feet, and it's moving them all the way through to this patented device that I invented as part of this whole system. Again, to keep it brief, this is taking the mixture of room air and neutral material, bringing it through this Teflon tubing, which is surrounded by a dopant reservoir. Because that gas is hot, the dopant is able to permeate through the now porous membrane of that Teflon. And now you've got a mixture of doped air and analyte coming through out the other end. Then it goes in front of an Krypton VUV lamp for a photodissociation process. And now that you're actually close to the mass spectrometer, that's where you've got ions. So here's just a picture of that whole system demonstrated with a yoga ball, just something pretty large to give us an idea of what we're dealing with here and what it really looks like to look at an object that is 2 meters away from a mass spectrometer. We actually implemented this on a bunch of baskets from the National Museum of the American Indian because they wanted to study the dyes that were on these baskets to recover information about traditional techniques that have been lost through the years because when stuff got bought from native weavers, it wasn't necessarily written down. So this is us doing this work, in the lab in real time. It's not fast work because these objects have to be handled very carefully, but it is successful because we're able to identify dyes and not leave any kind of visible mark on these baskets. And I just want to wrap it up there so we can move on to our next speaker and leave up briefly all the people who I worked with on the various projects that were mentioned in this this brief rundown, although there are many other projects, and I did not do a great job of pointing out where every little element was based or related to something that I've done before, but we can address all that in the Q&A. Thank you. And I'll mute myself. So Tricia can go.
All right. Asher, thank you so much. That was fascinating. I had never considered what I would do if I couldn't get my sample into the laboratory. So with that, I'm very happy to announce our next speaker, which is Dr. Tricia Tucholsky. So Dr. Tucholsky is currently a program officer with the Board on Life Sciences at the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. At the National Academies, she primarily works on projects that address emerging policy and technical issues associated with life sciences and biotechnology research. Specifically, her 2 primary projects focus on charting a path for studying RNA modifications and engaging scientists in Central Asia on data governance principles for life sciences research. Prior to this, she was an IRTA postdoctoral fellow at NIAID in the Lab of Immune System Biology, working with Alexandra Nita-Lazar to study proteins in the innate immune system. Tricia received her PhD in analytical chemistry from INGA at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 2020, and her research focused on developing top-down proteomic tools to study proteoforms in heart disease. She also received a BS in forensic chemistry from Penn State University. Tricia, we're so glad we're here. Please take it away.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Let me try to share my screen. Let's see. I know we practiced this. All right, can you guys see that?
Looks great.
All right, Thank you so much. Well, I'll just start by saying, thanks, Amanda, for the introduction, and thanks to the organizing team, the ECR transitions team, for the invitation, Nick and Nathan. I know Nick from grad school, and then I met Nathan at NIH when I was doing my postdoc. So close-knit community, and it's really great to be back and sort of reconnecting with everyone after making the leap to a science policy career last year. So it's only been a year, which is kind of crazy. So I kind of just want to start off by giving a timeline of events to sort of illustrate how I got to my current position and sort of the thought process that happened along the way, because I think it's kind of interesting to look back at where you were, 10 years ago, and what your thinking was at that time and where you thought you would be, and then looking at where you are now. It's all sort of amusing sometimes. So I'll start just at the very beginning of my scientific career, I would say. It's interesting to think back on this because this sort of demonstrates that I've had this interest in how science and society intersect from a really early age. And so I started at Penn State, and I did my BS in forensic chemistry. I originally wanted to be a chemical engineer, and it was just because I really liked my AP chemistry class in high school. And so I was like, wow, I really like chemistry. So of course I'm just going to go be a chemical engineer. And then I got the curriculum, and I saw how many physics classes I was going to have to take. And I don't really like physics that much. So I was like, well, I really, really enjoy watching the show Bones with my mom. And so I was watching that the summer leading up to college. And I was like, wow, it'd be really cool to be like Dr. Brennan and be, a forensic anthropologist. And I'd already been accepted at Penn State, and I was like, well, they don't have a forensic anthropology program, and I really like chemistry, so maybe I'll try forensic science and do the chemistry path. So that's what I did, and I really loved it. But at the end of that journey, I wasn't quite sold on the idea of going and working in a crime lab or doing crime scene analysis. And during that time, I really was fascinated by the anthrax cases and the technology developments that sort of led to them tracing the anthrax spores back to the source. And that field is called microbial forensics. So right before I was thinking about grad school, I was reading a lot about that case and the things that are really needed to advance microbial forensics as a field. And I came across this novel concept, at least it was novel to me at the time, of proteomics. And so I started looking into labs that did proteomics. And so that landed me in the lab of Inga at UW-Madison in the chemistry department. So I did my PhD in analytical chemistry. And as Amanda already mentioned, I did work in top-down proteomics. I was developing tools for top-down proteomics to specifically study proteoforms in heart disease. And so that was a really fun time. I was there for about 5 years. During that time, I actually had a really great opportunity in 2019 to take a break from what I was doing at UW-Madison to do an internship. And so I went and did an internship with Alexandra Nita-Lazar at NIAID, and she works in the lab of immune system biology, and she was doing really cool work working with, developing proteomics tools to study innate immune signaling. And so we were studying proteins in the innate immune system. So I had a really great time during my summer there. So great that I actually decided that that's where I wanted to do my postdoc. And so I went back to Madison sometime between 2019 and 2020, COVID happened. And so I ended up, luckily having enough done with, my current, my thesis work that I could, during the lockdown, write my thesis, defend it. And then I moved to DC and smack dab in the middle of the pandemic to start my postdoc with Alexandra. And so I don't like to say that COVID was like a good thing, because it's not, but I would say that like there's definitely a silver lining for me in that it sort of the pandemic caused me to slow down a bit. Because you're in grad school, you're just doing work, publishing papers. And so during my postdoc, it was of course a slow start because of COVID. I had to wait a couple months to actually even get approved to go into the lab to start. And so, I got a slow start. I eventually picked up pace, but after a year, I started to sort of think through what I wanted to do after. And I wasn't quite sure that I wanted to stay in the lab. And so the day-to-day work wasn't doing it for me. I really loved the research. I loved the problems we were trying to solve. I thought they were really interesting. And so I knew that about myself. I knew that I really enjoyed science and research and the process and asking questions and answering questions and talking about it with people. But the day-to-day lab work was not necessarily what I wanted for myself. And so after about a year, I started exploring some options for alternative careers, and NIH is really great in that they have a lot of career support services for trainees. So that's really awesome. If you're looking at potential places to do your postdoc, I highly recommend NIH. It was a great place. So I ended up finding this group at NIH. It was the Science Policy Discussion Group, or SPDG. And so that group was pretty instrumental in helping me to sort of, or I suppose maybe giving me the confidence I needed to say, yeah, I think this is what I might want to pursue. And so not even a year later, I actually started applying to jobs, and I came across a really awesome job posting at the National Academies of Sciences. And so I am now here, and I've been here for about a year and a half, and I've really enjoyed it. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit today about what this job looks like, what I'm working on, some of the projects I'm working on that might be relevant actually to the proteomics community. And I won't get into a lot of those details, but I also, if I have time, is interested in the transition to a science policy career, because there's a lot of stuff that you just don't know until you talk to somebody or hear somebody tell you. So just to tell you what the National Academies actually is. A lot of people don't know this, but we are a non-governmental nonprofit organization. We were chartered by the Congress in 1863. President Lincoln wanted to be able to have an entity that could provide independent, objective advice to inform policy with evidence, spark progress and innovation, and then confront any challenging issues for the benefit of society. And this was around the Civil War. So it was a lot of times the problems they were trying to address were war related, but that's really changed since then. There's still, a lot of projects related to, defense and things like that, but it's really expanded since then. So I just show a timeline here of, the creation of the National Academy of Sciences. Then in '64, there was the National Academy of Engineering, and then National Academy of Medicine came in 1970. And then they're all combined now into one big entity that we call the National Academies, or NASM for short. So what we actually do, and this is sort of some boilerplate language for everyone, but we marshal knowledge and expertise across disciplines, and we do this to address sometimes contentious issues. We convene experts, we reach consensus based on evidence, and we identify the best path forward. So a large part of what we do is advise. And so what I do day to day is, work on these projects where we basically have gone out based on the project, look for experts that were going to be able to provide us the necessary information to address the problem, and then we work with those experts to basically put together materials such as a consensus study report, or we conduct a study to try to answer a specific set of questions. And 90% of those come at the request of federal agencies. So while we're a non-governmental nonprofit organization, we do get a lot of federal requests for these studies. Something called a consensus study, which is something you might be most familiar with, is considered sort of the gold standard for advice coming out of the academies. We also bring people together in various ways using workshops, symposia, roundtable, and then there's also an educational component. So we do have, fellowship programs, colloquia, journals. Of course, a lot of people are probably familiar with PNAS. And then there's, of course, a virtual science museum. So I'll go really quickly through this. I just wanted to give an overview of the structure because I don't really think people understand the National Academies as I'm talking about it, as this entity that advises policy, because a lot of people think, PNAS or the membership branch where, your professor might be a National Academy member or something like that. But we're actually, where I work is a part of the operating arm. And so I'm situated in this division on Earth and Life Science, Earth and Life Studies, or DELS. And I'm with the Board on Life Sciences. So this board was established in 1984. And it was meant to serve as the focal point for addressing critical emerging policy and technical issues associated with life sciences and biotechnology research and their applications. And so just shown below are just some of the areas that we focus on. So, there's everything from biodiversity and ecology to biotechnology and the bioeconomy, and then also some biosecurity and biodefense. So I just want to take a minute to show you just some examples of some of the things that have come out of the Board on Life Sciences, just to sort of help you connect directly some of the products that come out and how they actually influence policy. And so this study that was published in 2020 that was, I wasn't a part of because I wasn't there yet, but it's called Safeguarding the Bioeconomy. It lays out conclusions and recommendations that are meant for specific actors in the government or people who can actually make a difference. And so I won't go into too many details because we don't have a lot of time, but this executive order that came out in 2022 actually addressed 6 of the recommendations that were laid out in this consensus study report that came out. And then most recently, there is this bold goals for US biotech and biomanufacturing that was also informed by activities that are related to this report on the bioeconomy. So you are seeing a direct link to things that are happening, in the executive office, coming from products that and studies that came out of the Board on Life Sciences. Most famously, probably, is this report called Mapping and Sequencing the Human Genome, which came out in 1988. And this is the report that actually spurred the Human Genome Project. So that's a really cool piece of information to sort of link the reports and the advice that come out of the academies with real things that we're all familiar with. I won't go into a lot of detail about this, but sort of the RNA version of the Human Genome Project is, we're doing a report on this now. It's meant to sort of address some of the technical and infrastructural issues involved in technology that is available to study RNA modifications. And so this is a study that's being sponsored currently by Warren Alpert Foundation and National Institutes of Health. We're expecting this to be out in 2024, so look out for that. I won't go too much into the detail about what they're looking at, but now I'll really talk about probably what you're interested in, which is if you're interested in science policy, what should you do? So I'll just tell you what I did and hopefully provide some information for you if you are interested in a career path that's similar to this. So what did I do? I joined a discussion group during my postdoc, and that really helped me to inform, what I was interested in and identify, topics that were of interest to me. I also took a class. This Science and Technology Policy Academy is a really great place to start if you're interested. I also talked to a ton of people. So I did a lot of informational interviews and I found out a lot of information that way. So, talk to one person and then you ask them, who are 2 other people that you'd want to talk you'd recommend I talk to? And then they kind of lead you in these different directions and you find out a lot of information that way. There's also a lot of fellowships. So I'm only showing 2 here, but there's a ton of state and local policy fellowships that you could also explore. But 2 of the most popular are, one's the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowship Program. And then one through the National Academies actually is the Christine Marzian Science and Technology Policy Fellowship. So the main difference, not the main difference, there's a lot of differences, but if you're an international student, the Marzian Fellowship is where you'd want to go because the AAAS Fellowship is only for US citizens. So if you're interested, those are some things you can check out. There's also professional networks. So the National Science Policy Network is a great place to meet early career science policy people, see job postings, see resources. It's also really inexpensive to join. I think it's like $20 every year for people who are in their like postdocs. So things I learned from talking to people, science policy is a spectrum. So there's jobs that you'll do that are close to the science, and there's jobs you'll do that are closer to the policy. I would say my current position definitely lands me closer to the science, which is great because day to day I'm, reading papers on RNA and learning new things and writing and talking to experts about what they do. So that really lands me close to the science, but there are a lot of jobs that are way, way, way more policy focused. So I would say I don't have current experience with this, but people who are maybe like on the Hill or working as a staffer for the Senate, that would definitely be much more policy focused. Focus your job search on topical areas or problems you're interested in. While you're on the job search, some advice to keep in mind is that your first job likely won't be your last job. So try not to put too much weight on picking the right job or the perfect job. And that sort of leads to this next piece of advice that I found that was really interesting and helpful, is that try to check most of your boxes, but if something doesn't check all of your boxes, that's sometimes okay. So be a satisficer and not a maximizer, and that sort of helps you to make these really what feels like really important decisions, but they're not necessarily like the end of the day what is going to determine the rest of your future. Do you know what I mean? So my advice for you, finishing up here, is that I think something I sort of thought when I was coming into this was, I know nothing about policy. So I was like having this like imposter syndrome about policy. And so I joined the science policy discussion group at NIH, and I felt like, oh my gosh, everyone around me knows so much more about policy than I do. But I actually just want to tell you that you know so much more than you think about policy, because it impacts your day-to-day life. And it also impacts like the research that you're doing in the lab right now. So pretty much you look around you, you just look at, the mRNA vaccine that we all had for COVID. That's, the result of a policy push to get those things out fast. So just thinking that you know more than you think. And you're going to do a lot of learning on the job. Like I'm learning every single day new things. So don't be too intimidated if you feel like you know nothing about science policy. And then just finally, most important, I think being flexible, adaptable, and willing to learn new things are the key components to success in this field. And then I won't go too much into this because if you're interested, we'll talk about it later. But if you are applying for jobs, you're going to have to take a completely different approach to your resume than you do for academic jobs. You're going to want to condense it to 1 or 2 pages, flip it. You're going to put all your leadership experience first, your writing samples, demonstrate that you can communicate to both a technical and general audience. And then all of your papers, which is going to kill a lot of you. It's going to be like, oh no, all the things I worked on in grad school, I spent so many hours on these things. You want me to put them last? Yes. No one cares that you spent, the whole last year of your grad school career working on a PNAS paper. It's a great accomplishment. It's of course very impressive and important. But what's really more important is that you can carry out project management and you have leadership skills and you can carry something from start to finish, and that you have these like really key communication skills. And so with that, I'll end, and I know we're going to move into a question and answer period, so I'll take any questions you all have. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Trisha. That was fantastic. It's another one of those careers that I feel like in grad school we don't really talk about, but clearly there's, I mean, hundreds of scientists, if not more, working on this across the country. So I really appreciate your perspective. So as I mentioned, we're going to go into kind of a joint question and answer period here. So everybody who is on the webinar has a little Q&A that they could go ahead and ask a question if they'd like. And I will be moderating them, as we go. But I'd like to go ahead and start off. So both of you, this is a very non-traditional career section. But I have to say, after 4 years of grad school, I was really told about two careers: academia and going into industry. So for trainees who may be on the call who know that they don't want either of those careers, but don't really know what they do want, what would you suggest? How should they explore it and kind of get an idea of all of these PhD careers that are out there?
Well, I'll volunteer. So my advisor was very clear that most people don't have or want academic careers. So we were never, and I guess that group did produce a few academics throughout his career, which is just about done now. But yeah, most people went elsewhere. I don't know, I can make a plug for the government. That is the third branch. No, I think that in general, think more about what kind of work you want to do than who particularly you want to work for. I was just, I directed myself a little bit. I made a few deliberate choices to, seek out this kind of research that I haven't really done before. And after that, it's more like things just kind of falling into place. Your job search will be determined by so many things beyond that. I mean, if you've got a significant other, that's probably the most overriding factor right there.
Yeah, Asher, I just want to follow up on that. I think that you're spot on when you say just think about the type of work you want to be doing rather than where you're doing the work. And I think just again, like I said, talking to people, maybe if you see somebody who's doing an interesting job and you just call them up or email them and have a conversation like, how did you get there and what did you do? I think that that's probably the best way to sort of inform those people that don't necessarily think they fit into the industry or academic path.
Awesome. Thank you both. I thought it was very interesting, but however, that you both kind of did a very traditional thing in that you both went on and got a postdoc before you move forward. So I'd be interested if either of you, if you could go back, would you still do a postdoc? And if so, what kind of experience do you think people should look to gain in a postdoc that might help them in some of these non-traditional career routes?
Trisha, do you want to go first this time?
Sure. Yeah. So great question, Amanda. I think for me, I had a lot of like soul searching in my postdoc career wise. So I would say I don't regret it at all. Like, I think, I will say I don't think you need a postdoc to do a policy career. I think a lot of people even come into the academies with master's degrees in different fields. And so you don't need a PhD. A lot of people have PhDs in science policy, but you don't necessarily need a postdoc. Postdocs always help with giving you different experiences than you had in your grad or undergrad. And so I think there's a lot of value in them, but I definitely don't think they're needed. And I don't regret doing it, but I think because it helped me find where I wanted to go. And I think it gave me the experience I needed to show on a resume that I was interested and I had the skills. But I think had I discovered that a little sooner in grad school, I might not have done a postdoc. And I might have been just fine. So that's what I would say. I don't regret it, but I do think that it's not needed.
For my part, I never wanted to be an academic at any point. Postdoc was just the title that existed. The other possibility that I had at the time was at an instrument company. And I thought that would be not different enough from what I had already done. I guess I was mildly worried about painting myself in a corner. And also, I didn't think I was talented enough for the situation I would have been going into. I don't know, it's one of those alternate histories. So I'm glad it worked out the way it did. Definitely a postdoc. I think you should seek out something that is at least in some way kind of orthogonal to your past, because you might find you like it, or you might find you don't like it, which is also very valuable, if not more valuable. And yeah, it definitely looks good to an employer. I think the reason that I'm at the Smithsonian today is because I had this weird checkered path through different techniques and different institutions, and they figured I would be able to kind of handle myself. I don't know if they really knew what they were getting into, but it worked out well for everyone.
Absolutely. So with that, obviously a lot of our graduate education is focused on heavily technical skills. And I think that goes pretty deep, especially when we're all in analytical chemistry programs. But I'm interested in your current positions. What are the most important kind of non-technical skills that you use? And how would you advise for a trainee to really work on developing those as an early career researcher?
For me, it's 100% communication. I give talks of various kinds regularly. I give tours all the time. Sometimes they are to important people from downtown, like from higher offices in the Smithsonian. Sometimes they're visiting researchers. Sometimes they're middle school groups. So it's very important to be able to read your audience and talk to different levels. It's even more challenging when it's a virtual talk and you can't see your audience. So sorry, everybody. But yeah, definitely communication. So written communication goes without saying. Hopefully you've already had a good foundational training in that in school. But yeah, verbal communication. I always thought of giving talks as like performance, like I was in drama club in high school, and I think that's not too far apart. You're not following a script exactly, but you're following kind of a loose script, approximately what you want to say, if you're prepared.
Yeah, I'll just tag on to that, is that communication is absolutely probably the number one skill, and communication to different audiences is so important. So just to give you an example of, I talk to very technical audiences, so groups of experts, on our committees. And then right now we're working on tuning these recommendations that they have for the government to speak to policymakers. And, a lot of these people don't even know what RNA is. And so you have to sort of explain, why is it even important? And why should they care if we can, map an RNA modification? And so those are things that you have to have in terms to be successful, or at least, demonstrate that you have the potential, that you're working on those things. And you always become better with practice, of course, right? I don't know how to write recommendations for policymakers. I'm learning right now. So, and another thing I'd say that's like super important in my day-to-day is project management, and keeping people on track, and giving these experts that we work with structure. So, they come and they participate on these committees, but they have no idea what we're doing. That's your job, to give them, the structure day to day, and set deadlines and follow up and things like that. So project management's been a really important key player, I'd say.
Thank you. So this question is a bit more for Asher, because you have a really interesting CV. You've kind of bounced a little bit around that Baltimore, DC area. And so my question for you is, with these different positions, how do you know when it's time to move on, and when it's time for you to seek out new opportunities?
That is an easily answered question. When they let you go. So my postdoc, I finished 2 years, and they extended me for the 3rd year, which was good. Towards the end of the 3rd year, I was of course looking around. I was going to do a second postdoc, again, a second job. That's really what it was, but it's called a postdoc. At the Naval Research Laboratory, I had my application in. This would have been through National Research Council, so that takes a few months. And then my would-be advisor quit. He gave us 2 weeks notice kind of thing. So they basically dispatched someone, because I'd already toured the place and whatnot. So they dispatched the head of the contractor company to go and hire me and bring me in. but then I'm on soft money, right? Because I'm a contractor. And you have no ability to write for funds yourself. You can contribute to other people, but you're not really master of your own fate. So time came, the money was going out. I knew this a few months in advance. So they stretched me a little bit here and there, but yeah, eventually money's out, got laid off. That's how it goes. So then I was unemployed for about 4 months. Went to ASMS, got back from ASMS, started a job that I really did not want, but it was a job. This was it. This is another contractor job, the Walter Reed. I did not do a lot. The job description I got paid for. I took care of some instrumentation, but they were paying me to fill a chair. I was very well compensated chair filler. I was also telling people I'm too young to retire because I wanted to research. An opening came up with the Smithsonian. I had experience with USA Jobs, the federal hiring portal at that point. So I was fortunate to get through to an interview, and they liked me well enough. Fortunate.
Absolutely. And when you saw the Smithsonian job, was there anything that really attracted you to it right away?
Oh yeah. Coincidentally, when I was looking for the next step after the FDA, I actually toured these labs and with the idea of like maybe doing a postdoc for the mass spectrometrist who was here at that time. And I told them, you got great research. I just can't do it for other reasons. But no, it was fascinating possibilities there for the applications. I think they had instrumentation that seemed like a place I could go. They didn't really know what they were getting into. I don't think I really did either, but I was definitely looking for a way out. And it sounded good. And I had been in the area for a long time at that point, so I knew people who knew people. It looked like it was very much worth a shot. And it couldn't have been worse than where I was anyway, so.
That's always, a very good thing.
I'm just trying to be honest.
No, I totally appreciate it. So for both of you, I'd love to hear advice. These are two jobs. Once again, you're not really, you're not directly prepared for them in grad school. You might have up-and-comers who are really interested in potentially applying, but are afraid that, well, they don't have these qualifications. What advice would you give them to be able to kind of put their foot out there and maybe try to get involved in some of these fields, which aren't quite, the traditional route?
Yeah, I mean, so I would say the advice I was given, which was really good advice, and this is at the point where I sort of knew I wanted to do something in science policy, but I went to the career advisor at NIH for NIAID, and she was like, okay, so you have a year, like, engineer your resume so that it is ready for a policy job. And so I joined that group I told you about. So I would say people that are interested or know what they're interested in, try to engineer your resume, engineer experiences that fit on a resume. And I think even if you can't do that, demonstrate an interest in something. So write a blog post for some science blog, or, that was one thing we had the opportunity to do as a part of that group, was write blog entries about things that were interesting to us. So do those types of things that are sort of out of the box that can set you apart, and then also demonstrate an interest, and just look at the job postings and see what they're asking for, and try to tailor yourself to those postings. And I think that that'll get you where you want.
USA Jobs is very much about tailoring your CV or resume or whatever to the post. You can't lie, but you definitely need to make the right emphases. There's a lot of things to know about USA Jobs, which I learned the hard way for some of them. The conservation science field in general is very difficult to get into. I think it helps to have as wide experience as possible. But yeah, breaking into it is difficult. And I'll just tell you how it works for most people. Most people do a lot of internships and fellowships over many years before they get a permanent job. That's the current reality. It's rough.
Yeah, absolutely. That's good to know. So the last thing, I know we're about out of time, but I thought maybe we could end off and you can all just, or you can each, excuse me, just tell us when you go to work every day, what is the thing that just makes you the most excited?
I am pleased when I get to work on a cool application. I haven't gotten to work on too many pieces of pop culture. I did get to do a little something with the Ruby Slippers. I missed my chance to do an analysis for the Black Panther costume. Missed my chance. It is definitely gratifying to be able to work directly with people who have cultural heritage interests. For like the basket project I showed and some other things, I got to speak directly to the people, and they were willing to go along with a technique that, you know, was new to them. You know, it's very much a client education kind of situation. But it was nice to be able for them to have confidence in me and for me to be able to help them with what they want to know. But personally, I'm very driven by instrumentation. I like building things and making new techniques, and methodological development is really that's what gets me to work.
Yeah, for me, I would say definitely just connecting with experts in different fields. So one project I didn't get a chance to talk about that's actually one of my favorites is this project we're working on with scientists in Central Asia. And it's a lot more complicated to work with people who don't speak the same language as you. And so but it's really rewarding when you feel like you've made a connection across that language barrier and you understand each other, because we have simultaneous interpretation during meetings, but you know, it's just so rewarding to work with people that are coming from just completely different backgrounds, completely different experiences, and just still making that science connection, because science is very international, and so sometimes we forget about that.
Absolutely. All right, so with that, I just want to give a huge thank you on behalf of myself and the entire ECR committee of US HUPO to our fantastic speakers, Dr. Tucholsky and Dr. Newsome, for joining us today. Thank you again. I've learned a ton, and I'm really excited to see you hopefully at ASMS, or Trisha, perhaps at another meeting coming up, even US HUPO. So thank you all so much. Have a great day.
Thank you.